fine. Yeah, he's the one who fishes. He's been out all winter fishing.
Yeah.
If it's above 40, he's out either playing pickleball or fishing.
Good. Lori, good to see you, and Alan and Margie and Jerry.
We're going to have to leave exactly at 1. We get our second shot today.
Oh, thank you.
Congratulations.
Yay.
Thank you.
Michael, good to see you too.
Thank
Arnie?
you. And Kathy will be on, and she is home.
Yay. Thank God. She said you may not be growing horseradish this year.
Probably not.
Isn't it a perennial?
It is. We grow it in a bucket, but we haven't gotten enough
Oh,
to
in a
harvest.
bucket. Okay. Does it winter over in the bucket?
Yes.
Okay, because my mint doesn't, which disappoints me every year.
Oh.
I guess it's just too dry.
Bernie, good to see you. Mark, Fern. So let me just give a little introduction, and then we'll start. I know we have some other people coming on. Kathy's coming on, and it'll be lovely to catch up with everybody. This week and a little bit next week as well, I want to continue with that idea of what revelation is in Judaism. And it sort of cropped up and dominated our thinking 2 weeks ago when we were looking at the Parashat Yitro and what it was that Moses and the children of Israel experienced at Mount Sinai. And then, of course, this week in Parashat Mishpatim, Moses and Joshua, Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, they all experienced something along with 70 elders. And they saw the pavement that looked like it was made of sapphire. And that was upon which they felt the presence of God. And what the heck was that, right? And so it brings us to this era, to our modern day. What do we conceive of when we think of the possibility of a revelation? Is it simply an inspiration? Is it an aha? Is there something like a prophetic insight? And of course, we're not going to exhaust this topic. Many volumes have been written on it. And I just thought that this forum, because we have been studying for so long, and you're smart and you're good, you're engaged, and you know Torah. So as we have gone through it, I'm interested in you sharing your thoughts. What do you think the origin of this? Is it simply the reflections of our ancestors and that's it? Or was there something a little bit more than just spiritual and theological reporting, ancient journalism that we study? Is the Torah just the best of the ancient Jewish New York Times, right? Or is there something more? And our ancestors wrestled with this too. So it's not as if we're asking inappropriate questions. It's really looking at it and considering where we are when we look at this text. So I want to welcome everybody. Louis, good to see you. I was just thinking about you the other day. And of course, Leslie and Barbara and Kathy, welcome home from the hospital, Kathy. So glad to have you back home, and Wendy, of course. So we're going to say a little blessing for Torah, and then I'm going to get to some unusual text. Again, the Parashat Shavua, the Torah portion of the week, I reserved for on Tuesday, but there's a little bit of this week's Torah portion which will come in, but I've got a lot of other stuff, especially from Rambam. I want to look a little bit, if we have time, at the Reform Movement's take on this as well. But most importantly, I want to hear your voices. So, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, creator of the universe. You've sanctified us with mitzvot, and you've commanded us to engage with words of Torah. Now, it's important that I also note that tomorrow night begins the new month of Adar. It's Rosh Chodesh. So if you look up in the sky tonight, it'll be dark. It'll be cold. It'll be dark too. But maybe if it's clear enough tomorrow, you'll see a sliver of the new moon. And it says in Tractate Ta'anit of the Babylonian Talmud, Sheminiknas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, that as the month of Adar comes, we increase B'Simcha, in happiness. It counterposes that with the thought that when the month of Av happens, for the first 9 days of Av at least, it's days of decreasing happiness as they are preparing to remember the destruction of the temple. But in this week's Torah portion, it's the increase of happiness. And we have, of course, next week, the festival, Adar comes, and in 2 weeks we have the festival of celebration of Purim, which is this joyous festival as well. It's also this Shabbat is Shabbat Shekalim. So a lot of things going on in this week's Torah portion. So I have a bar mitzvah on Shabbat morning. And so usually when I have a bar mitzvah, then I have Rabbi Jordy do the early service. And when she has a bar mitzvah, then I'll do the early service at Temple Sinai, the 9 o'clock one. But this means because of the confluence of the Rosh Chodesh Adar and Shekalim and Mishpatim, the Torah portion, there's 3 Torah readings. So I said, I'm not going to burden you with 3 Torah readings, Jordy. I'll race in there too. So I'll read a couple of the portions. So there's a lot going on. So when we consider all of the teachings and the traditions that we have, the idea of revelation, I think, is one that we hear the word and then we move on. So as we're about to consider, just for a second, as we have a little forum here, what do you think of when you hear the word revelation, or this Torah Sinai, the Torah from Sinai, or Pi Adonai Moshe, that God spoke and Moses wrote it down? What goes in through your minds? And Margie, you rose your hand. Go ahead. But unmute though.
Truth. And it could be spiritual, transcendent, scientific, mathematical, anything that gets filed in my head, at least, as a truth that I then test as I go along in life.
I love that.
And I think that's where the transcendent comes from for me.
Very good. So let's keep that in mind. Truth. There's something really, i.e., not just opinion, not just thought, not just what we consider fact, but truth. Okay, Lois, will you go ahead and share, please?
It's not new to Judaism. It happened in many ancient religions. So I'm not sure that I would say it's truth. I think the false messiahs all had revelations, if you will. Muhammad, certainly long after Judaism was formed, but his whole religion was based on his revelations from God. So I think it's some kind of a spiritual aspect that you get involved with that you think, or it's really true, who knows, but you feel that something has been said to you or given to you, be it false or true.
Very good. Now, first of all, I'm not going to argue with anyone with a knife in her hand.
I'm peeling mangoes for.
So I'm putting that out there, right?
Oh, okay. I should put the knife down. It's not sharp.
but in the Torah, it also deals with false prophets. It'll say there will be prophets among you who will rise up, and you'll be able to test the veracity, i.e., the truth of what they say. By, does it come true? Does it ring true? Does it make sense? So there's something very interesting to what both of you said. Amy, go ahead.
I feel that revelation, and I feel that we all can feel it, and I have no doubt that there was a Moses who felt it, but I think it's helps you better connect to the rules of life, whether it's the physical rules or the emotional rules or the people rules. But I think there are holy people walking this earth that are in touch with that part of life. And it's physical, emotional, but they instinctively understand and know the right thing to do for the people around them, for the animals around them, for the earth. They're just in touch. And I feel that they have revelation on a daily basis with God.
Very good. Thank you. Is that the insight that they have that gives you the rules of life, as you put it? It just seems to you, and I'm just trying to put it, understand it, that you're saying that those kinds of insights transcend the common wisdom that we have. These are things that look like more universal truths or insights that raise our level of consciousness. Is that
Right,
close?
right.
Okay, good, very nice. Go ahead, Mark.
To me, it always just seemed that a revelation had to be fundamentally changing of you or of the person who receives the revelation.
So that revelation is something that's transforming for the individual.
Yes. I suppose that there could be more people that receive the revelation that could also be transformed. But for some reason, I just always looked at it as on a personal level.
Good.
I wanted something that changed me, that made me a better person.
Right. And we've had religious figures, again, from different traditions where they came into some kind of experience and it did change the course of their life. The most obvious to us, of course, is for Moses. Here he was as a shepherd and he saw this bush that was burning and wasn't consumed. Very, very good. Who else would like to, any insights or thoughts? So just one other consideration. Now there were, as Lois mentioned, that there were ancient oracles, and actually there was a place in ancient Judaism for oracles as well.
Mhm.
And people would go to either the priest or the shaman, the prophet at that oracle. They'd ask questions. Sometimes, more often than not, they'd get an answer that was somewhat of a riddle. We find evidence of that, of course, in the Hebrew Bible and in ancient Judaism as well. The Sibylline oracles are a part of the apocryphal literature. That literature, which was not considered holy, it was not included in the canon of the Hebrew literature, but was still very much a part of the ancient culture of our Jewish ancestors. So going to an oracle, and I have a question, I have a conundrum, a problem, and I present it to this priest, this prophet, and from this oracle, then I am presented some kind of answer. Maybe it's clear, maybe it's a riddle, but I'm getting an answer. And that's a one-to-one. But in Judaism, we don't really have that on the main. Rather, we have text. Now, originally the text was Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, and the Lord spoke to Moses saying or communicating, and that's a phrase which we're going to get to in a little bit. One of the commentators mentions that that's a key to the highlight that there's some kind of revelatory material coming on. But immediately we understood, as Moses did in Mishpatim, that he wrote it down. And once it's written down, or even if it's not written down, but it's just kept orally and repeated, it still remains a text that challenges us and is in our possession for us to interpret. And our interaction with God then is not through an oracle, not through a shaman, not through some kind of ecstatic dance or experience in which we commune with the whole, the holiness of God. Although at some point later on in the 18th century, we certainly know that the Hasidic movement went in that direction, and there was a fear that they were becoming a little bit too idolatrous, that they were being able to possess God or being possessed by God. The mainstream of Judaism was, no, we have a text. And it is through considering this text and looking at this text that each individual, and that's what Mark was bringing up, each person then looks at it, considers it, it informs him or her as they go through, look at this text and consider it through the lens of their own personal experiences, insights, personality, the context, etc. That's what's exciting, I think, with Torah study, is that we have a text, and when we're looking at it, there's something about it that reflects of a revelatory experience. Go ahead, Lois.
What about during the days of the temple?
Say it one more time.
The days of the temple, where the priests were the intermediaries for people.
Not well. Here's the thing.
I mean, you took your sacrifice and asked for something.
Yeah, the sacrifices were, of course, ordained by the Torah. The Torah says this is what you should do. And but when someone went to the temple, they brought an offering. This is Shabbat Shekalim. You know, every family was to bring their dues. Reminded to bring their dues for the temple, right? But there was a function saying that part of our communal or national experience was bringing the first fruits of our harvest, the first of our flock and our herds. When I had a vow or a thanksgiving or a forgiveness or a purification right because of my life cycle experiences, I would bring an offering to the temple, but I'm not going to give it to the Levite or to the Kohen and then receive from the Kohen like Johnny Carson's Karnak. You know, I think, you know, making a prediction, right?
Okay.
That was not the interaction. You just handed it to the Kohen, the priestly families. They took it from there. You didn't have any reaction other than interaction other than sometimes the meat that we would give, the sheep, for instance, that we'd give, that some of that meat would come back to us and we would consume. For instance, at the Passover, we would consume some of that offering, but we weren't receiving from that priest, from that Kohen, some kind of religious insight. Rather, early on, and we know this is already by the 3rd and 4th centuries before the Common Era, we were very text-based. People would come together and study and consider what the significance of those texts were. Any other insights before I'm going to show a very surprising little text from the book of Proverbs, which inspired a lot of other people to comment and to use this. Let me see what I got here. I'm going to make it a little bit larger for everybody. It's a very interesting piece. If you can see right, this one verse in Proverbs 25, Tapuach Zakav, Bamaskiyot Kasif, Davar Davur al Afnav, like golden apples in silver coverings is a phrase well turned, i.e. something that is written, right, that is interesting, let's consider this for a second. Golden apples in silver coverings, right? So they're saying when you look at, let's get the image. There's a golden apple, and gold is, and always has been, considered the most valuable. It doesn't tarnish. It's always been considered superior to silver, right? So why in the world would I cover something golden with silver, which does tarnish?
To hide it?
Oh,
Go ahead, Fern.
Would it, I'm just riffing here. Could it be that this is something so precious that we really should take care of it? And if we wrap something gold in silver, then we'll have to take better care of it than if we just have gold apples sitting there.
Okay, there's a protection level. That's very interesting. Who else has, someone else was offering an answer. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say to hide it. Something
hide it.
valuable you don't necessarily want out in the open.
Yeah. No one's going to steal a silver apple, but a golden apple they may steal. Okay. All right. Kathy, go ahead.
We took a tour of a cathedral in Panama City. And they took us to this beautiful church, all the gold and stuff on the altar. And the thing that they told us is every once in a while, Captain Morgan would come into town. So when they saw a ship, they'd run in and paint everything black. So you wouldn't know it was gold. And you could still see little creases, little bits of black there. But yeah, it was to hide. Yeah, to hide their gold.
Very good. Very interesting. Anyone else? Okay, Lois, please. Unmute, please.
It still would look pretty, but it would be less ostentatious.
Less ostentatious. Very good. Okay. So let's look at that word maskeo that it was used in the book of Proverbs. And Rashi has an interesting take on it, and Rambam will do the same. So maskayot, he links to the time when we have, in just a few chapters away from us, in chapter 33, after the apostasy of the golden calf, when Moses goes back up to God and receives the commandments for the second time, the tablets for the second time. And Moses, and we're going to look at this text in a little bit too, it says, Hareini na et kevodecha, let me see you. Let me see you. And before he had said, let me see you, he says, let me know you. Let me know your ways. I.e., reveal yourself to me. Nigla otcha. Let me see you. And God responds saying, you can't see me. If you stand here, I will cover up your face, your eyes with my hand. He says, so there's a cover, but God's not totally covering. God is covering in a translucent kind of way so that there is an impression there, but not something that is a full comprehension there. So I want to go on with this because this image of a golden apple covered, but in what way? By that silver. So let's look at what Rabbeinu Bachya in the 14th century had to say. Who would like to read what Rabbeinu Bachya had? But I want to read this very first part, because he quotes this line that happens 70 times in the Torah. As if I didn't do enough, I went through my concordance last night and I'm counting all of them. So I'm pretty sure that there's 70 times. So if someone comes up and says, no, you know what, there's only 68. Okay, forgive me. But it was late night and I count them. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. That phrase happens 70 times in the Torah. Bachya starts with that, and then he's going on. So who would like to read what Bachya has to say? Oh, come on.
I'll read.
Thank you.
Okay. According to the plain meaning of the text, the word
lemor, right.
Lemor, okay, means that Moses was to relay the instructions received from God to the people. Alternatively, the word could mean that in addition to what the Torah has spelled out clearly for all to read and understand, there are hidden meanings to be deciphered by those who apply themselves to Torah study in depth.
Okay, so the first thing he has to say, that there's some kind of revelation with it, but there's also certain hidden meanings to it. So there's a revelatory aspect to it that goes beyond the obvious.
What does lemor mean?
From literally to say.
Say.
Yeah, it's the infinitive of saying, of communicating.
I'm not far enough in Yoni's class to read without vowels.
Oh, I'm sorry. This was nigla. The nigla, or that which is revealed, versus nistar down here, that which is hidden. Go ahead.
The nigla.
Nigla
The revealed part are the details of the commandment.
The
The mystical hidden aspect of this portion is that which not everybody can grasp, even if he tries. There have always been aspects of Torah not accessible to the average person. This is what David said in Psalms. God has said one thing, I have heard two. A single communication may contain more than one message. Solomon echoed the same sentiment when he said, a word spoken properly is like golden apples set in silver.
Right. So now we get it that they're looking at this line, this intriguing line in the book of Proverbs, that the apple that's golden apple that's covered in silver suggests hidden meanings, hidden truths, different levels of communication that are happening. So in a way saying that the revelatory experiences, even those revelatory experiences that we have from Moses, when God says, here Moses, here's the Torah, it's not as if it can all be understood on one level. That's for us, that's for you. As we read this text and we wrestle with its meaning, the meaning may be obvious to me or to you, but my obvious meaning is not your obvious meaning. We have different perspectives, and in studying together in Chavrusa, we share with each other these different perspectives, looking at different layers and levels of what we were getting from that same text. In a way, we become participants in the revelatory experience. Go ahead, Mark. You have to unmute though, Mark. Okay.
I remember when Lori's brother got married, I was the best man. We were behind their bima. It was a Lutheran church. And I was reading their Bible and it talked about Revelation. And I said, why does this keep happening? He says, well, there's no end to progressive revelation. Sometime after that, I asked the Catholic priest, I said, what does that mean to you? And he got really angry at me. It was like I was in Hebrew school again. And he says, well, it's because Jesus came, that's the end of the revelation. These guys had different interpretations of it, none of which drew me to their opinion.
Yeah. Well, their book of Revelation is
right,
dealing with the end of life experiences and all the rest. Anyway, so Alan, try to turn up your speaker a little bit. Maybe that'll help, because I think pretty much clear.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Bahia again. Used this phrase saying, and the gold covered by the silver suggests multiple meanings going on. Now, unlike, by the way, those who are saying, well, the revelation didn't stop with Jesus or with Moses or with Muhammad. There's a part of Jewish tradition, and one that we are interacting right now, explores the meaning of and it tries to discover certain truths and insights as we continue to explore it to this day. That's why we are in effect in dialogue with the Rashi, the Rabbeinu Bachya, the Nachmanides, the Maimonides, etc. Each generation, we're still in dialogue with them. Let's get to, speaking of Maimonides, okay, let's get to this is the conclusion then of Bachya. So Fern, if you'll do that, and then I'll have someone else read Rambam. Fern, this was this is still Bachya up here.
I'm still unmuting.
Okay.
Okay. In this verse, Solomon compared the matters which are revealed to silver, whereas matters concealed he likened to gold, i.e. they had first been overlaid, made invisible by silver. It is possible to explain that any word in the Torah has two kinds of meaning. There's the obvious meaning called
Nigla,
and the hidden mystical meaning, to whatever, Nistar. It's really small. We got the Hebrew. We also have a verse in Job, for there are multiple aspects to wisdom. Torah is a source of wisdom on different levels. In addition to its plain meaning, the nisha, there are still words.
Right, and you'll hear that word frequently. Peshat is
Peshat. Oh, peshat. Okay, I got it. Yeah.
Right, either it's simple or frequently it's the contextual meaning. You read it, and the simple reading of the Garden of Eden with the story is that there was a fight over apples. The deeper meaning, is revealed with drash, or interpretation, is that it's a metaphor for the condition between men and women and trust and all the rest. So let's get to Rambam. He's a little bit earlier, obviously 12th century Spain, then to Egypt, considered widely to be our greatest early philosopher and rabbinic commentator. So who would like to read some Rambam?
I'll read it.
I can read it.
Thank you.
Whoever.
Yeah, you can go ahead if you'd like.
No, it's fine.
Oh, okay. Having spoken of smiles, I proceed to make the following. Similes. All right. Let me get a little closer here. Having spoken of similes, I proceed to make the following remark. The key to the understanding and to the full comprehension of all the prophets have said is found in the knowledge of the figures. Girls, you need to go away. Stupid dogs. Their general ideas and the meaning of each word they contain. You know the verse, I have also spoken in similes by the prophets. And also the verse, put forth a riddle and speak a parable. And because the prophets continually employ figures, Ezekiel said, does he not speak parables? Again, Solomon begins his book of Proverbs with the words, to understand a proverb and figurative speech, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. And we read in Midrash, Shir Hashirim Rabbah, that to what were the words of the law to be compared before the time of Solomon? To a well, the waters of which are at a great depth, and though cool and fresh, no man could drink of them. A clever man joined cord with cord and rope with rope and drew up and drank. So Solomon went from figure to figure and from subject to subject till he obtained the true sense of the law.
Okay, hold on again just a second. To what are the words of the law compared before Solomon? Because we couldn't really understand it. The waters of the revelation were deep, were so deep that even though they were cool and refreshing and vital, we couldn't get to it, right? And so the prophet just obtained that which we sort of knew was there, and we knew we wanted, we desired it, but we couldn't get there. And Solomon was able to get it, but not just by some kind of magical insight. What did he do? He put it together. If you're going to get, he loved that metaphor of having to lower that bucket down deep into the well. What did he, in order to do it, to make the rope long enough, what did he have to do?
Cord by cord and length by length.
Exactly. So in effect, it's saying that Solomon is doing what? In order to get revelation. It didn't happen just at one time. What did he have to do? He had to put together.
He had to reach deep into insights.
He had to look at the different layers.
He had to look at different layers. Barbara, you were sharing something.
Oh, he had, in retrieving it, you have to work for it.
Had to work for it. He had to plumb the text. He had to look at the text. And again, he's working with text. He's putting this sentence, this concept with that experience together, trying to figure it out. And through textual analysis, he's able to come up with some insight, right? And that, in many ways, was Solomon's great gift. He was one of the first great textual commentator. Of course, he also is said to have been the author not only of Proverbs but also of Kohelet. This person who we've read Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. We've read Proverbs. What are they? They're an assembly of sayings, of truths, of insights. One insight on its own isn't enough. You put together all the insights to try to get really deep and try to find something. Amy, you had.
Yeah, I thought David wrote the most of the prophets?
David wrote the Psalms.
Okay, all right.
So they gave Daddy the Psalms, and the son Solomon Proverbs and Kohelet. But there are other participants in all of that as well. So that's just okay. Was anyone? Did someone else have anything? Okay, let's get back to continuing again. This is Rambam. Putting things together. So who was that? That was Leslie reading.
That was me.
Okay.
So far go the words of our sages. I do not believe that any intelligent man thinks that the words of the law mentioned here as requiring the application of figures in order to be understood can refer to the rules for building tabernacles, for preparing the lulav, or for the 4 kinds of trustees.
Okay.
What is really meant.
So let me again clarify. So Rambam said there's different kinds of text. We have text that should be understood at the Peshat level, i.e., when the Torah says, "You shall bring together the branch of the palm tree and with a leafy branch together with the fruit of a goodly tree." We know they're talking about a lulav, and so we don't have to interpret that that's a metaphor for something different. And yet there are specific lines in the Torah which absolutely say darsheni, specifically when it has things like, and we're going to get to it, that the 70 elders and Moses all saw God standing on this sapphire pavement. What the hell is that, right? That's in the Torah, and also the rule of the lulav is in the Torah, but you don't approach both passages in the same way. So, go ahead. What is really meant by? Where's Amy? Leslie, sorry, right here.
Trustees. What is really meant for the apprehension of profound and difficult subjects concerning which our sages said, if a man loses in his house a selah or a pearl, he can find it by lighting a taper worth only 1 isar.
Yes,
Thus,
an inexpensive candle can help him find that which he dropped on the floor.
Thus, the parables in themselves are of no great value, but through them, the words of the Holy Law are rendered intelligible. These likewise are the words of our sages. Consider well their statement that the deeper sense of the words of the Holy Law are pearls, and the literal acceptation of a figure is of no value in itself. They compare the hidden meaning included in the literal sense of the simile to a pearl lost in a dark room, which is full of furniture. It is certain that the pearl is in the room, but the man can neither see it nor know where it lies. It is just as if the pearl were no longer in his next page. In his possession. For as has been stated, it affords him no benefit whatever until he kindles a light. The same is the case with the comprehension of that which the simile represents. The wise king said, any word 50.
No, a word. This is what we read earlier.
Oh, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in vessels of silver. Here the explanation of what he said. The word maskayot, the Hebrew equivalent for vessels, denotes filigree.
Network.
Things in which there are very small apertures, such as are frequently wrought by silversmiths. They are called in Hebrew maskayot, literally covered transparently. Is that a mask? Is that from the word masecha?
To cover, in effect.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay. From the verb saka, he saw, a root which occurs also in the Targum on kalos, because the eye penetrates through them. Thus Solomon meant to say, just as apples of gold in silver filigree with the apertures, so it is a word fitly spoken.
Right. So this revelatory experience is that when we look at something, okay, let's just, if I'm just willy-nilly and I see at some distance this apple, what I'm going to see is it's silver, right? How will I ever notice that there's gold underneath? What do I have to do?
You have to scrape it.
No, you don't scrape that filigree. That's precious. What do?
You bring it close to your face.
Yeah, you look in close and you go, ooh, look inside, right? And you can see the gold inside that is both concealing and revealing at the same time. And that's the surprise. That's the delight. And the parable was that that's the same thing with reading the Torah. You read the Torah, you have a text, and it says this. But if you just read it at the Bashat, if you just read it at the literal, if you just read it at the superficial, okay, you get something, right? But you're not getting it. You're not having that experience. You need to look closer, and frequently, most valuably, in my mind, read it not just by yourself. Read it hopefully with friends that you can share some insights, because you're going to notice something that I wouldn't. Someone who's familiar with jewelry might say, "Oh, it's that kind of filigree. Look at the kind of filigree, the loops that they use." And I wouldn't know from that kind of filigree. I dig filigree, but I don't know the technical part of it. So those of you who have certain artistic insights or familiarity with these techniques, you bring a new and important insight to it that draws our attention. And if I'm all alone and I don't have my friends to study with, that's why I have a Chumash. I have a Torah commentary. I can read that line and I read it and I can get something from it, but I'm not really seeing the gold underneath until I look at what Rashi had to say, Ibn Ezra had to say, Sforno had to say, Rabbeinu Bachya had to say, and frequently Rambam. But Rambam doesn't make a running commentary of the Torah. The Guide to Perplexed is a little bit different off. That's why I wanted to bring it for you. Anyone, before we go on, because we're going to look at this passage, which is in some ways mirrors what we just had in this week's Torah portion, but it's in a couple of weeks. Anybody? Oh, you're just so anxious to go on. Okay, good. Okay, so in this week's Torah portion, we read in chapter 24 of Exodus that Moses and the elders all saw this sapphire pavement that was under God's feet. What does that mean? That was under his feet. Well, what exactly did they see? And so that's what we're racing with that. In a couple of weeks, in Parashat Ki Tisa, we're going to get to Exodus 33, just 9 chapters ahead. But because of Passover and other kinds of things, we're going to have a little bit of the holidays, we're going to have some delay. But regardless, in this passage, it comes right after the apostasy of the golden calf. Again, what were they looking for this golden calf? Moses was on that mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and they were freaking out. They thought, oh my God, the old man's dead. What are we doing here? And so they were waiting for this great revelation, this teaching that Moses was bringing them. And they had already said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do it and we'll continue to learn it. But the distance, the waiting overwhelmed them. They built this calf. They said, we have to have something in hand, something tangible to pray to direct our prayers to, right? And so they built this calf. Moses comes down and flips out. You know the story. Breaks the tablets, and God says, okay, this people is incorrigible. Let's get rid of them. And Moses goes up and said, no, give them another chance. Okay, and so God said, all right, I'll give you another set of 10 commandments. It didn't use those words, but to an effect. So this is what happens. Who'd like to read this passage from Exodus 33? Okay, Barbara.
Adonai would speak to Moses face to face as one man speaks to another, and he would then return to the camp. But his attendant, Joshua, son of Nun, a youth, would not stir out of the tent. Moses said to Adonai, "See, you say to me, lead this people forward, but you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. Further, you have said, I have singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor. Now, if I have truly gained your favor, pray let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider, too, that this nation is your people." And he said, "I will go in the lead and will lighten your burden."
Right, sure. So, and God said. So Moses is making this plea to God. Let me know you. Now, this, by the way, happens after they've already received the 10 Commandments. He's already been up on the Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. My God, if you don't know someone after being with them for 40 days and 40 nights, something's wrong. But Moses still says, I need to know more than just the silver outer. I need to know the inner too. I need to know the golden inner. And this is what Moses continues to say. Go ahead, Barbara.
And he, Moses, said to God, "Unless you go in the lead, do not make us leave this place. For how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us, so that we may be distinguished, your people and I, from every people on the face of the earth?" And Adonai said to Moses, "I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name."
To which then Moses presses it to the ultimate declaration. I want to hold, possess, and see clearly that golden apple.
And he said, "Oh, let me behold your presence."
Now, this is what he says. V'yomar hareini na et kivodecha. Let me see your glory. Right? I want to see you. I don't want to see refractions. I don't want to see reflections. I don't want to get hints. I want to see with my own eyes. And this is what God answered.
And God answered, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you name Adonai, and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. But," he said, "you cannot see my face, for man may not see me and live." And Adonai said, "See, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by."
That's where it says, "Vasakoti et yadi." I will cover up, or I will shield you.
"Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen."
Right. So this, in about a second, we're going to read a little passage from Rambam. Again, this calls from all the quotes that we're using from Rambam come from the Guide for the Perplexed, or the Amora Nebuchim, and it's a very important philosophical work which ruffled a lot of rabbinic feathers because it explored certain ideas that, unless you were intellectually comfortable, you might think that they're challenging your faith. And a lot of the rabbis thought that, you know what, if people are reading this, people are going to have way too many questions. It's like, Mark, when you asked that priest, what about this and what about that? And basically he was saying, don't ask, right? Rambam, Maimonides, he was a person who loved to ask. He said, man, every question is good. And he found wisdom from Aristotle and Socrates and Plato and from the great philosophers of his day that he met in Spain and in North Africa and Cairo. He was an intellectual, and he said, no, this is too important. I think it was Margie who said, when we look for revelation, we are searching for truth. That was what you said, wasn't it? So let's look at that word truth. In Hebrew, what's truth? Emet, right. Emet you guys who have been studying Hebrew know. The first letter of Met is Aleph. The middle letter is Mem. The final letter is Tav. Those happen to be the first, middle, and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And so emet, or truth, sort of spans the spectrum of all knowledge, i.e. truth is not some narrow, fine point someplace, but it is rather found in expanding your understanding to consider all different perspectives. And certainly Rambam was a champion of that. Before we get into Rambam's commentary, in which he makes reference to this passage we just read from Kitisa, and again, we're going to read it in a couple of weeks. I just want to make sure if anyone had any questions or thoughts. Go ahead, Michael.
Actually, mine is on a question on the Hebrew, the difference in Vayomer and Midaber, or Vidaber, or whatever. I know one is say, one is tell, but is there a real difference?
Yeah, you know what, that's a very, very good question. And you will find different answers, right? Lidaber is the infinitive, to tell, right? Midaber, and he told. Lamor, the infinitive, to say. And so the hu omer, and he said. So since we're refracting everything through our understanding of English, when someone says he told me or he said to me, what's the difference? It's pretty thin.
Really, in English,
right. It's pretty thin. So for many of us, we'll look at that and say, well, lidaber, lamor, what does it matter, right? It's it. And others will say, no, you're missing it. You're reading it, those two things as if they're the same, i.e. you're seeing only a silver apple. Look closer. There's a difference as to why this phrase is used. And the same thing, by the way, when people will say, oh, how come God was called Elohim here and Adonai over there? What's the difference? And someone say, well, God, the Lord, what does it matter, right? Well, our commentator said, yeah, there is a difference. There's a change. There's a change. How come Jacob was sometimes called Yaakov and sometimes Yisrael? Sometimes in the same sentence, they'll go back and forth. Was it willy-nilly? Was it just circumstance? Or was there something behind it? And that's what intrigues and entices and hopefully thrills people of different backgrounds and perspectives. So let's go back to this text and see what Rambam had to say about this. Who would like to read Rambam? Come on. Oh, right, Margie, go.
All right. Rambam, Guide for the Perplexed, Part 1. In this figurative sense, the verb is to be understood. When applied to God, I saw Ra'iti Adonai, and Adonai appeared Vayera unto him, and God saw Vayar, that it was good. I beseech thee, show me Hareini thy glory. And they saw Vayiru, the God of Israel. All these instances refer to the intellectual perception and by no means to perception with the eye as in its literal meaning. For, on the one hand, the eye can only perceive a corporeal object, and in connection with it, certain accidents we color, shape, etc. And on the other hand, God does not perceive by means of a corporeal organ, as will be explained.
Now, two of these examples we already had. So the one in this week's Torah portion, and they saw, i.e. the elders, and he's going to get to that in a little bit, saw God, the God of Israel, and under his feet was this sapphire pavement. So we're going to get to that in a little bit. And then the passage we just read, the Hareini et kavodecha, I want to see, please, your glory. That is there. So since God is not corporal, i.e. not as a body, not a thing, not material, we can't see God. And in the same way, the way we understand the act of seeing is through the eyeballs. God doesn't have eyeballs. So we're using terms about God, either seeing God or what from God's perspective. So, and the Lord saw the plight of the Israelites in Egypt. Well, we use that in English language or in human language because that's all we have. We only have our human way of communicating it. But Rambam's saying you have to be cautious. We use these terms, God saw or we saw, but they're not accurate. So use these as poetic, as metaphoric, and not as literal. I know someone raised their hand earlier that had something to share.
Oh, I think that was me. I just was saying, I just meant, does this mean God doesn't have eyes? Is that what he's saying?
Exact, or hands. We say God's mighty and outstretched arm and with his mighty hand, and it's like, or pi Adonai, from the lips of God. Was God have lips, right? Now we love that poetic metaphor. And as we continue on, with some of this Revelation stuff, I've got this magnificent text I want to share with you, and it's Shir Hashirim in the Song of Songs. And I want to wait until Passover for it, because that's when you read Shir Hashirim. But it has, we read it in sort of this romantic story, but and I long for him to kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. Now we look at that and we go, well, that's sort of sexy, but instead it's a reference to Revelation, and we're gonna look at that in a whole different way. So let me go ahead and get to. I'm sorry, Arnie.
I just was wondering while I've been listening to all this, the tradition in Judaism of digging. One of the few religions that have that, where it continues in the Talmud, very much so, that you're on the face value of anything. You're supposed to delve for different looks at it, etc. Avoid the abstract, stay and look for truth. And I'm just wondering, when did that really set in? Certainly during the temple, they were doing that. Was that a Babylonian thing later? Or
no, it was pretty darn early. Now the Sadducees, who were the priestly class, they didn't dig it, right? But that was a hereditary class. I mean, you were a priest, you were a Kohen because your daddy was a Kohen and his daddy was a Kohen, right? And it was all descendants of Zadok through Aaron. That's why you were a Sadducees, a Zadokite. Zadok was the last great priest under David. So there was a non-class, they had class, but a non-hereditary class of scholars who said, let's look at the text, let's unpack the text, let's explore the meaning of the text. And the Sadducees mocked them and called them Parshiim, that they are those who divide up and cut up the text, which later on was earned them the title Pharisees, those who parsed that text. Now the heirs of the Pharisees, the ones who followed the Pharisaic tradition, were the rabbis. But in both cases, Pharisees and then later rabbis, they weren't. It was not a hereditary class. You had people who became rabbis not because they were born into a certain family. They came from all walks of life, but these were people who devoted themselves to study and to teaching. And so that was, goodness, at minimum of the 3rd century before the Common Era. We already have some of that. If you look at the books of Proverbs, of Ecclesiastes, of Ben Sirach. Again, Ben Sirach is not in the Hebrew Bible, but it's one of the apocryphal literature. We already find that they're looking at text and plumbing it and digging into it. So do we have time for one more? I just want, can we get one more? Okay, thank you. So I'm going to get to the first part. This is our week's Torah portion where it said, Vayel Moshe v'Aaron Nadav Avihu, and Moses, Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, and the Shiv'im Ziknei Yisrael, and the 70 elders of Israel. They all went up. And what happened? V'yiru et Elokei Yisrael. They all saw the God of Israel, the tachat raglav, and under his feet. This is what it's really saying. The tachat raglav, b'ma'aseh livnat hasapir, that it appeared that there was a likeness of livnat hasapir is pavement of sapphire, of etzem hashamayim latachor, and it gave off a glow like the very purity of the heavens. Hashemayim, not just the sky.
Yeah, Rabbi, I keep thinking of this like the Paul Simon song "Diamonds on the Soles of Their Shoes."
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I love it.
Just keeps bringing that to mind.
Right. So Chezkuni, also in the 14th century, he says, "Look, don't take it literally. This was just a prophetic vision. They saw something." And that was important. But let's read this last little piece from Rambam, and we'll save the rest for the following week. Who'd like to read this last little piece from Rambam? Go ahead, Kathy.
I can read it. Okay.
Kathy, diamonds on your feet.
Yeah, diamonds on the sole, yeah. But the elders of the children of Israel were impetuous and allowed their thoughts to go unrestrained. What they perceived was but imperfect. Therefore, it is said of them, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, and so forth. And not merely, and they saw the God of Israel, the purpose of the whole passage is to criticize their act of seeing and not to describe it. They are blamed for the nature of their perception, which was to a certain extent corporeal, a result which necessarily followed from the fact that they ventured too far before being perfectly prepared. They deserved to perish, but at the intercession of Moses, this fate was averted by God for the time. They were afterwards burnt at Taberah, except Nadav and Abihu, who were burnt in the tabernacle of the congregation, according to what is stated by authentic tradition.
So I'm gonna stop there. I'll tell you why, because he goes on. But again, he denies that they saw anything, and the only purpose of the text was to criticize those who even attempt to see. Now, there's a passage, and I made mention to this some time ago, of the Pardes, of the three great rabbinic sages who went into the garden to try to see, to have a tangible understanding and connection with God. And that didn't work out well either. Spoiler alert, one dies, one goes crazy, and one becomes a heretic. So there's something about the rabbi saying, God's there, but it's not for us to possess. God's not for us to possess, because we possess things. We hold things, we manipulate things, we buy and sell things, we destroy things, and as well as create things. But God's not that which is created. God is the creator. God is not material. God is that which brought into being all being. And so get over the idea that you can make a picture of God, a statue of God, you can manipulate God, make God look like you, and that you can claim and hold and possess God, because that's an affront. But that's our desire. We want to hold it, to possess it, and that reassures us by saying, as Bob Dylan saying, because God is on my side, right? We find great comfort in the idea that God is on my side and God hates the other guy. Well, that is also a form of idolatry, and the sages railed against it, and they said from the very beginning the Torah did as well. You can't see that necessarily at the very beginning level, because that's silver, it's beautiful, but underneath it there's a greater truth, something that is even more inspiring, more universal. And so this idea of revelation intrigues us, is supposed to inspire us. And I think by studying this text, by parsing it, by bringing your personal experiences and insights, you're a part of that process as well. So that's what I got for today.
It's good. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Feel free. We have lots of stuff on Friday and other things. I look forward to seeing you guys soon. Yoni, thank you, buddy.
Could the sapphire thing that they saw, they had to interpret it as to something they'd seen before? Did they just think it was an ocean? And so God wasn't bigger than the ocean?
Well, you know what? No, remember we looked at this on Tuesday, that some said it's some kind of blue thing, and it reminded them of heaven, but also reminded them of the sea, and the sea reflects the heavens. Rambam will go into it as well, saying, and it's somewhat complicated, so I don't know if I even recorded this, that the heavens are not made of the material that we have, that the heavens are made of light. Again, light is not something you can grab onto and hold onto. It is of a whole different construct. And so he said, we want to consider things that we can touch, hold, drink, eat, whatever. The heavens are on a whole different level than this. And so that which God stood on was the way we perceive that God stood on it, but God was reflected as being of this different dimension than we were. So ultimately, what not only Rambam but all the other sages said, if you're in the pursuit of trying to see God, or who was no, Kathy will get this, that popular singer some years ago, Joan Osborne.
Oh, God is one of us.
What if God was one of us? Well, that's exactly what the rabbis were saying. Yeah, don't go there, right? God's not a slob on a bus.
And what did John Lennon have to say about it?
Who?
Imagine there's no heaven.
Right, John, right. Absolutely. Right. But again, we make heaven into some concrete place too? Because what do the people say? Well, he's up in heaven. They're up in heaven. And it's like, really? Heaven's up? How do you know?
Elevator.
No, maybe it's way over there. So,
That's a whole other discussion.
right. We'll
The
get
Jewish
to it
view of heaven.
Anyway, I know that people have to get going too, and I just am so grateful that I get this time to be with you, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Yoni,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yoni,
Yes.
do you have a minute to stay on? I have a question.
Absolutely. Happy to.
Okay.
I'm taking off, and Yoni,